April 27, 2026. A 212-foot rocket section arrives at Kennedy Space Center on a barge. Drone footage. The largest core stage NASA has ever shipped, on time and on budget, looking immaculate. 24 hours later, it rolls into the vehicle assembly building. On the other side of the same complex, the capsule from the last mission arrives back from its lunar flyby for post-flight inspection. 2 Artemis vehicles, 1 campus. The rocket for the mission NASA just redefined is sitting across from the capsule that just came back from the moon. NASA spent 53 years promising to go back. When the rocket was finally ready, why didn't they go? Before sunrise on April 27, 2026, Kennedy Space Center came alive. The Pegasus barge nudged up to the dock, carrying the towering core stage for Artemis III, a 212-foot segment of the Space Launch System, the most powerful rocket stage NASA had ever shipped. Crews in orange vests and white hard hats gathered along the causeway, watching as cranes and ground vehicles surrounded the barge. The core stage, gleaming and unblemished, was carefully hoisted and rolled toward the vehicle assembly building. For the technicians, engineers, and contractors on the ground, this was a rare moment when years of assembly and testing came together on schedule. The hardware looked flawless. The arrival was not just on time, but ahead of the most recent internal schedule. It was, by any measure, a textbook delivery. The next morning, another convoy entered Kennedy's gates. This time, it was the Orion crew capsule from Artemis II returning from its lunar flyby. The capsule, still bearing the streaks and scars from re-entry, was wheeled into the multi-payload processing facility for post-flight inspection. 2 spacecraft, one just back from the moon, the other newly arrived and ready for stacking, stood less than half a mile apart. The images from that week captured a sense of arrival, as if the long wait to return to the lunar surface was finally over. But the calendar told a different story. The hardware was real, but the landing date was not. The Space Launch System core stage, delivered in April 2026, had been built to support a mission profile first mandated nearly a decade earlier. Space Policy Directive 1, signed on December 11, 2017, ordered NASA to return humans to the moon and sustain a presence there within a decade. The public expectation, set by the directive and repeated by agency leaders, was that a lunar landing would happen no later than 2027. Yet, as the rocket hardware rolled into the vehicle assembly building, the official Artemis III mission plan was quietly being rewritten. For the ground crews at Kennedy, the contradiction was impossible to ignore. The core stage, immaculate and mission-ready, stood in the assembly bay, while the capsule that had just survived a lunar flyby was being disassembled for analysis. In press briefings, NASA officials spoke of historic milestones and steady progress. But behind the scenes, the mission timeline had slipped again. The promised return to the lunar surface, first targeted for 2024, then 2025, then 2027, was now officially deferred to Artemis IV, tentatively scheduled for early 2028. The gap since Apollo 17 had stretched to 53 years. For those working on the floor, the sense of accomplishment was mixed with a quieter question. How could the hardware be ready, but the mission itself remain out of reach? The answer, buried in audit reports and engineering reviews, would reveal a deeper pattern, one that ran through every level of the Artemis program. The Office of Inspector General and the Government Accountability Office supply the numbers that define the Artemis III decision. Each SLS and Orion launch carries a price tag of $4.1 billion, as reported in the OIG audit IG 21025. This figure remains consistent across NASA's own cost estimates and is referenced in every major program review since 2021. The cumulative spend through Artemis IV, including SLS, Orion, the Human Landing System, and the AX-MU suit, is projected between $93 billion and $105 billion. In adjusted dollars, the Apollo program cost $290 billion to $310 billion for 6 lunar landings. The technical readiness of the Orion heat shield remains unresolved. The January 2026 OIG review documents char loss and block cracking in the avcoat ablative material after Artemis I, and it warns that the mitigation, using a modified re-entry trajectory, does not retire the risk for Artemis I. The capsule is currently undergoing X-ray analysis at Marshall Space Flight Center. Certification for a full lunar return remains incomplete, and no new data has been released since the initial inspection. The human landing system built by SpaceX is dependent on orbital cryogenic refueling. NASA's own architecture brief states that about 10 tanker launches will be required for a single HLS mission. The GAO November 2023 assessment recorded 6-month or greater slips on 8 of 13 critical milestones. The critical design review for Starship HLS is on hold until SpaceX demonstrates orbital cryogenic refueling, a capability not yet achieved as of April 2026. The human rating review cannot proceed until 3 successful refueling demonstrations have been completed, with at least 1 full load transfer to depot. Refueling remains the gating requirement. The Artemis lunar spacesuit, intended to enable surface extravehicular activities, is 18 months behind its original qualification schedule. The April 2026 OIG audit records the delay and notes that Collins Aerospace withdrew from the program in 2024, leaving Axiom Space as the sole contractor. The suit must withstand a temperature range from -280 to +250 degrees Fahrenheit during 8-hour lunar extravehicular activities. No full environment test has been completed, and Axiom confirmed in April 2026 that the first in-orbit test will not occur on Artemis I. The program-wide timeline reveals the same pattern. Artemis I launched in November 2022 after a 1-year slip. Artemis I launched in April 2026 after multiple delays tied to SLS readiness and heat shield concerns. The Artemis III lunar landing, originally targeted for 2024, then 2025, then 2027, has been removed from the schedule. The landing is now assigned to Artemis IV in early 2028, but the same 3 engineering gaps remain. OIG and GAO documents record each slip, each cost overrun, and each unresolved technical risk. The numbers leave little room for interpretation. The Artemis II landing was not postponed by a single failure, but by the convergence of 3 independent engineering crises at the same deadline. In the wake of Artemis II's return, the Orion crew capsule entered a new phase, not celebration, but forensic scrutiny. The Office of Inspector General Review in January 2026 documented the core concern. Avcoat char loss and block cracking, first observed on Artemis IV, persisted despite 2 years of engineering work. The audit's language is precise. The mitigation, using a modified re-entry trajectory, does not retire the risk for Artemis III. Post-flight inspection of the Artemis II heat shield revealed only minor chipping, a marked improvement over the widespread char loss seen after Artemis IV. But the difference was not a material fix, it was a matter of physics. For Artemis II, NASA deliberately flattened the capsule's re-entry angle, reducing peak heating by roughly 15% and lowering stagnation pressure by 20% compared to the trajectory required for a direct lunar surface return. The shield survived, but only within this gentler envelope, a fact confirmed by trajectory data and the Marshall Space Flight Center's ongoing X-ray analysis. Paul Hill, chair of the Independent Review Board, stated publicly that the agency will not certify the heat shield for the full lunar return until an uncrewed high-energy re-entry flight reproduces the nominal Artemis III trajectory. The certification tracker cited in NASA's fiscal year 2027 Integrated Performance Report lists the Orion thermal protection system as flight qualified for modified Artemis II re-entry, with additional validation required for full lunar return. The Marshall Space Flight Center scan plan, launched in September 2026, involves material sampling and X-ray mapping of 12 avcoat tiles. The final report is due in December, but as of the last Office of Inspector General audit, The root cause, insufficient permeability in the avcoat layer leading to trapped gas and char ejection, remains unresolved. The shield survival on Artemis II was achieved by sidestepping the harshest conditions, not by eliminating the underlying risk. Until a full-energy lunar return re-entry is flown and analyzed, the Orion capsule's heat shield stands uncertified for the mission it was built to complete. SpaceX's human landing system, the centerpiece of Artemis lunar descent plans, depends on a complex chain of orbital cryogenic refueling events that has never been demonstrated in space. According to the June 2023 NASA milestone letter, the critical design review for Starship human landing system was officially delayed, citing insufficient maturity of the cryogenic transfer plumbing and chill-down procedures. The Government Accountability Office, in its November 2023 schedule risk matrix, assigned the human landing system refueling chain a greater than 30% probability of delay on each of its 3 critical path items: the first in flight transfer, the depot buildup, and the full-scale tanker sequence. The architecture calls for 8 to 12 Starship tankers to launch separately, rendezvous in low Earth orbit, and sequentially transfer hundreds of tons of liquid methane and oxygen to a depot before a single human landing system vehicle can attempt trans-lunar injection. As of April 2026, none of these transfers have occurred. The first ship-to-ship cryogenic transfer demonstration, originally slated for March 2025, was rescheduled to June 2026. NASA's Deputy Associate Administrator confirmed in a 2025 press briefing that the human rating review for the human landing system cannot proceed until 3 successful refueling demonstrations are completed, with at least one involving a full 1,200-ton transfer to a depot-configured lander. The Government Accountability Office assessment details the technical gaps. Zero-gravity transfer interfaces remain at Technology Readiness Level 5, well below the Technology Readiness Level 7 required for crewed missions. Thermal control hardware for boil-off management is still in engineering validation, and the choreography for autonomous docking of multiple Starship vehicles has not been rehearsed at operational scale. Materials compatibility for repeated chill-down cycles, flagged in the Office of Inspector General Audit, remains an unresolved risk contributing to the critical design review delay. Each missed milestone compounds the schedule risk. The best-case projection, assuming no further setbacks, places the earliest possible crewed landing in late 2028. NASA's risk-adjusted scenario, as documented by the Government Accountability Office, warns that a single failed demonstration could push the timeline by another 6 months per attempt. The Artemis III deadline was not missed by a single event, but by the convergence of unproven technology, cascading schedule slips, and the hard boundary set by human rating requirements. The official documentation makes clear, without a proven refueling chain, the lander cannot be certified, and the mission cannot proceed. The spacesuit program, once seen as a manageable hurdle, became an unexpected anchor on the Artemis schedule. According to the Office of Inspector General, April 2026 audit, the Axemu suit was now 18 months behind the qualification plan that originally aligned with Artemis IV's launch window. Collins Aerospace, once responsible for pressure relief valves and composite joints, formally withdrew from the partnership in June 2024. Their exit left Axiom Space as the sole contractor, forcing a scramble to find new sources for critical hardware and to requalify suppliers. The audit records a 23% failure rate in the pressure relief valve burst test, nearly 5 times the allowable limit. The report states that valve failure rates remain above the 10% ceiling set for flight hardware, with remediation testing projected to add another 6 months. Mechanical stress tests on the hard upper torso composite revealed micro-crack initiation at 0.8% strain, with crack propagation exceeding the 0.2% density allowed before the 8-hour extravehicular activity limit. The Office of Inspector General recommends a redesign of the interlaminar adhesive, a change that adds 4 months of material qualification. Thermal vacuum cycles, intended to prove the suit's survival from -280 to +250 degrees Fahrenheit, remain incomplete. The limited tests conducted by mid-2025 showed thermal control overshoot of 30 degrees during rapid transitions, threatening the suit's ability to protect astronauts in lunar shadow. No full-duration, 8-hour lunar cycle test has been performed. The audit labels this as a critical path blocker for any landing attempt. The cumulative effect is clear. Each failed or delayed test, valve burst, joint integrity, and thermal cycling added 3 to 6 months to the schedule. The April 2026 Office of Inspector General Audit quantifies the program-level slip at 18 months, with no mitigation plan capable of recovering the lost time. Axiom's engineers are left with a backlog of qualification tasks, and the spacesuit's readiness stands as the final unresolved barrier. With no other vendor in the pipeline, the Artemis landing remains contingent on a single unfinished suit. On February 27, 2026, NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman addressed the press with a statement that became the program's inflection point. This is just not the right pathway forward. His words echoed the conclusion of a decision memorandum circulated internally that same week, one that cited the agency's own rulebook and audit findings. The document, referencing Space Policy Directive 1 and the Artemis program's governing requirements, established an unyielding logic. No crewed lunar landing would proceed without full certification of the heat shield, a demonstrated and human-rated lunar lander, and a qualified spacesuit. Each element, according to the Office of Inspector General and the Government Accountability Office, had missed its milestone. The Office of Inspector General Audit recorded that the Orion capsule's thermal protection system remained uncertified for lunar return. The Government Accountability Office's November 2023 assessment detailed that the Starship human landing system could not advance to crewed flight until 3 successful cryogenic refueling demonstrations were complete. The April 2026 Office of Inspector General report quantified the spacesuit program's 18-month delay, noting the absence of any mitigation plan capable of recovering lost time. The cumulative effect was not a single-point failure, but a program-wide rule. The Artemis III landing was officially removed from the schedule because 3 independent engineering tracks failed to reach certification at the same deadline. The decision memorandum did not cite hope or contingency, it cited policy, cost, and risk. NASA's own language, in the Office of Inspector General and Government Accountability Office audits, described the convergence of unresolved technical risks as the reason for removing the landing. Isaacman, invoking the lessons of Apollo, warned that the difference between success and failure will be measured in months, not years. The agency's public framing compared Artemis III to Apollo 9, an Earth orbit test flight that preceded the first moon landing. But the analogy falters. Apollo 9 was the 4th crewed Apollo mission, a deliberate step in a sequence. Artemis III was only the 2nd. The pattern is clear in the historical record. Each time the landing date approached, the deadline slipped and the mission was redefined. The rule, now written into the program's own decision chain, is that hardware alone is not enough. Certification, not ceremony, sets the boundary for flight. 3 conditions now stand between NASA and a crewed landing on the Moon in 2028. Each is documented in the audit trail, each with a clear technical requirement and a deadline that cannot be negotiated. First, the Orion heat shield. The Office of Inspector General's January 2026 report states that the AVCOAT ablative system is only flight qualified for the modified Artemis II re-entry. Certification for a full lunar return remains pending. The final verdict depends on high-heat plasma tests at Stennis, a full-scale drop test under the baseline lunar return profile, and an uncrewed Orion re-entry flight configured to match the trajectory for Artemis IV. Until those data confirm no char loss or block cracking under peak heating, the capsule cannot be cleared for a direct lunar return. Second, the human landing system. According to the Government Accountability Office's November 2023 schedule assessment, SpaceX must demonstrate 3 successful orbital cryogenic refueling events. At least one must involve a full 1,200-ton transfer to a depot-configured lander. Only then can NASA convene the human rating review and issue the certification letter authorizing crewed descent. As of April 2026, the first refueling demonstration is scheduled but not yet flown. The human rating clock does not start until the third demo closes without anomaly. Third, the lunar spacesuit. The April 2026 Office of Inspector General Audit records an 18-month program slip, with pressure relief valve burst tests, composite joint qualification, and full-duration thermal vacuum cycles all incomplete. Axiom Space, now the sole contractor, must deliver a suit that passes all environmental and mechanical tests, with in-orbit demonstration and flight qualification achieved before the Artemis IV launch window. No backup vendor exists. These are not hypothetical hurdles. They are the documented gates, each tracked by the Office of Inspector General and the Government Accountability Office, each with a timeline that leaves little margin. As the program enters its sixth decade since Apollo, Eugene Cernan's words echo from December 1972. "We leave as we came, and, God willing, as we shall return, with peace and hope for all mankind." The checklist for 2028 remains open, and the promise of return is still waiting for 3 signatures. Today, NASA's Inspector General confirms 2 of these engineering crises remain unresolved as Artemis IV moves forward. The Government Accountability Office calls the program's timelines unrealistic. Isaacman, at the February 27th press conference, warned that hardware alone does not guarantee readiness. The question is not if a launch vehicle can arrive, it is whether the mission can. Until those gaps close, the countdown is just a number. Share your perspective below.